I often talk about complex deals, so I want to answer the simple question, do you have complex deals? And I think there are four factors that determine whether you have a complex deal, and probably you only need to tick one or at most two of these boxes to really qualify for having a complex deal. And the first factor is stakeholder complexity. So there are a few elements to stakeholder complexity. The first is that you have multiple decision makers. So there are multiple people influencing the decision within the business. That could be procurement, IT, finance, operations, end users. So what you have to do in these situations is you have to cross multiple hurdles. You have to get technical approval of what you're selling. You also have to get commercial approval. There's probably somebody separate that is going to commercially approve the economics of your deal. And you may even need political approval, because it might be that if you've got the best technical solution, but somebody else in the organization has a connection with a competitor, then simply they win on that relationship basis. So you need technical, commercial, and political hurdles to cross when you've got multiple stakeholders. And I'm sure you recognize some of those issues. The second thing with stakeholder complexity is if what you're selling is sort of cross-department, if there needs to be involvement across department, if more than one functional area must agree, i.e. if sales and marketing and IT, if it needs to integrate across all three. And the third is if there's any career risk for the buyer. So if, for example, the project fails, is that buyer's reputation on the line? And if any of these things are true and you don't have engagement with multiple stakeholders, then you have a high risk of ghosting because your sales rep only has one contact. This means you have stakeholder complexity and you need to be able to manage for that. If a single buyer can say yes on the spot, then you don't need a complex qualification and sales process. It's totally different. But if any of these sort of ring true, then you have deal complexity. Number two is commercial complexity, and this really comes down usually to a high deal value. So a high deal value is, let's say if we had just sort of below £10,000. £10,000 or below is transactional for most businesses. One decision maker, fast cycle, usually no formal ROI case, and any sort of qualification or complex sales methodology is probably just overkill. Somebody can put that on a credit card, probably. 10 to 50k, mid-tier. Still relatively simple, but may involve procurement or a manager getting sign-off. Useful to start to apply more complicated sales disciplines and qualification methodologies. Above 50k, now it's into strategic buy territory. Now you need formal proposals, business cases, ROI discussions. There are multiple stakeholders usually. Above 100k, definitely. Enterprise level, almost always committee-based decisions, procurement, legal reviews, budget cycles, competing priorities. That money could be spent anywhere, right? So it gets very complicated. The second thing in commercial complexity is if you have long sales cycles. If your sales cycles measured in months, not weeks or days, then that's generally an indication of commercial complexity. Third thing, if you've got custom pricing. So anything where you have to price that it's not off the shelf and not off rate cards, that you actually do sort of bespoke pricing and putting something together that's kind of bespoke. And also if there's any negotiation as part of the process, typically. All of these things are commercial complexity, which means you have complex deals and you need to apply much more rigor in your sales process and your qualification process. Number three is solution complexity. And the first thing here is about implementation. So if there's implementation or onboarding required, software integrations, hardware deployments, process changes, if the customer has to in some way change the way they do their their day-to-day work, then there's implementation. You might need a go-live plan. If you don't have one currently, that could be something that could give you a competitive edge in your sales process. There's solution complexity when there's implementation. Very different to if it's just something transactional. Somebody just tries one unit, it's one thing, it just slots right in, or they can get using it straight away. But if there's implementation, this is complexity and it slows down deals. Often you have to have a proof of concept, some sort of proof of value or a trial. This is solution complexity. Another point here is if there needs to be ROI justification. So if the buyer must prove any metrics, any hard metrics internally before signing off, this adds complexity. Often as deal value goes up, there needs to be an ROI justification, and it's often on you as the seller to be able to prove and evidence that. Number three is change management. So if the end users actually need training, if workflows are disruptive, again, this kind of comes down to their day-to-day processes having to change and how they do their work, then they have to have some sort of way of managing that change. Then that adds solution complexity, because it might mean that they need to do a test with their users. They might need to do some small rollout before they do a bigger rollout, and these things all add complexity and slow deals down. And the final thing here is if there are high switching costs. So if they're working with something at the moment, or your solution replaces an existing solution, and they have entrenched competitors or existing integration or contracts, and there are any sort of switching cost elements that add to the cost, then this obviously slows down the deal and adds a big element of complexity. Number 4 is organizational complexity. So simply, some deals are going to be more complex by the nature of the organizations you work with. Generally speaking, if you sell to smaller businesses, selling is simpler. If you sell to bigger enterprises, it is more complicated. So what things to look out for organizational complexity? And this can vary even, irrespective of the deal value, but it's another thing to look for. So the first thing is if the business you're selling to has a formal buying process, if you have to do RFPs, RFIs, or if you have to go in for formal pitches, if there's legal and security reviews, if there's procurement steps, if there's a bidding process, if they have to get at least 3 quotes, if there has to be specific processes you go through, forms to fill in. So all of that formalized buying process that scares off a lot of sellers obviously is adding complexity to the deal. It slows it down. You have to be really acutely aware of what that process is in the business so you can jump all those hurdles. Second thing here is if the business has budget cycles, capital expenditure versus operating expenditure, how approvals are done within the business. If this is the case in businesses you sell into, if you're in the UK, for example, you can just look at when their end of year accounts date is at Companies House, and you can see when their budgets are likely to get renewed, and that will probably affect your sales process as well. And the third thing here with organizational complexity that I put under this category is strategic impact. So if the deal is tied to a major initiative, if it's not just a nice to have, then it is going to add a level of complexity into the deal, because that's got to be something that's got to be worked into how that organization buys and chooses and works and operates, and it's going to add in a big layer of complexity. So essentially what we're saying here is that if you tick any 1 or 2 of these boxes, then you likely have a complex deal. And if you have a complex deal, then you need a stronger modern sales process, and you need a stronger modern qualification process that you continually qualify deals throughout the life cycle of the deal, that you identify strong metrics, strong ROI for your customer, that you identify who the economic buyer is, that you identify who the champion is that can help push this deal through, who wants this deal to work. You've got to understand what the decision criteria is and be involved in what the decision criteria are for that business. You've got to understand what the decision process is and the paper process that goes through legal and procurement and all the sign-offs. And you've got to find what business pain your solution uncovers and implicate that on the customer so that you can solve that pain and prove that throughout the sales process.